Parshas Vayelech describes, among other things, the mitzvah of Hakel. Hakel is a once in 7 year convention at which the king reads the Torah, or portions of the Torah, to the entire people of Israel. This is described in Perek Lamed Aleph in 4 verses, 4 psukim. That's chapter 31, and psukim Yud through Yud Gimel, 10 through 13. So verse 10 simply says when Hakel happens, which is at the end of the Shemitah year on the holiday of Sukkot, every 7 years. And where? So it's when all of Israel comes to appear at the Beis Hamikdash, at the temple. So Tikra is a Torah Azos, Neged Kol Yisrael Bosnehem. Read this audibly to all of Israel. Who comes? Who's in the audience? Hakel es ha'am, ha'anoshim, v'hanoshim, v'hataf, v'gercha asher b'shorecha. Men, women, children, strangers. L'ma'an yishma'u, for what purpose? So that they'll hear, l'ma'an yomadu v'yaru es Hashem Elokechem, and that they'll learn and they'll fear the Lord your God, v'shamru la'asos is called the Torah Azos, and they'll learn to observe all the words of this Torah. So it's a little curious. Why is there a mitzvah to bring the children? Now you might say it's children of the age of, who are educable, who are age of going to school, of learning, of studying. An infant, obviously, no matter what you tell an infant about Torah, an infant will not absorb. There are those who say that there's some level of spiritual experience even for infants. The Gemara talks about how mothers would bring their children to the Beis HaMedrash, to the study halls. But the commentaries here grapple with this obligation to bring little children. And some, in fact, say that it can't mean little children, because what's the point of bringing little children? So it must mean educable children. The simple reading and the majority of opinions, as I understand it, say that it's talking about even infants, even sucklings, even nursing babies. So the question is, and the Gemara asks this, so why bring little children who can't understand? So it says, El litein schar l'miviyehem, to give reward to those who bring them, meaning to their parents. This requires a little bit of thought. Give reward to the parents. That's why you bring the children. Well, as the Kli Yakar points out, it doesn't have to be children. If what you're looking for is a way to give reward for people who bring others to the Hakel, even if they don't understand, it could be aleitzim v'avonim. You could tell them bring sticks and stones. You could tell them bring bowling balls, and you'll get reward. In other words, if it's simply a device for collecting reward, it doesn't have to be little children. It could be anything. So it would seem that there is a connection that specifically justifies bringing the obligation to bring little children who don't understand. What is this reward we're talking about? So David C. Hoffman says that the parents will accept upon themselves to teach their children Torah. It requires a little bit of analysis. What is it about bringing children that will cause the parents to accept upon themselves to teach their children Torah? And what is the schar? What is this reward that we're talking about that goes to the parents? So there are different types of learning. There are different types of spiritual experiences. Famously, at this time of year, many go on a personal spiritual journey to Uman. The wives do not go, the children do not go, generally, certainly not the little ones. That's one type of experience. And then there's another experience that includes everybody. There's a qualitative difference between those experiences. And there's a qualitative experience even in learning Torah for oneself, as opposed to learning Torah in order to convey it to others, to include others in the experience. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Perek Vav, Mishnah Vav, chapter 6, Mishnah 6, describes the 48 ways of acquiring Torah. Memches dvarim she'atorah niknes b'hem. And one of them is halomed al manas lelamed, learning in order to teach. In other words, learning in order to teach is not simply a nice thing. It is. It's not simply a mitzvah. It is. It's not simply another way of engaging in Torah. It is. but it has a qualitative benefit to the person who learns. In other words, it is one of the ways Torah niknes b'hem, to acquire Torah, that without it, the acquisition of Torah is less. What is it about learning in order to teach? The nature of one's learning is different when you're learning to convey it to others. One can engage in a Torah learning experience in which you learn and you get the point and you enjoy the point, and the experience kind of washes over you, and you're left with a roshem, with some kind of impression, but you're not necessarily left with a deep understanding of the Torah. It's possible. But when you're called upon to teach, to give a Devar Torah, to make a presentation, to convey a lesson, to teach a moral to somebody else, you feel compelled to master that material in a way that you wouldn't necessarily feel compelled if you're simply learning on your own. And it could be that, according to Rabbi Tzvi Hoffman, Rabbi Tzvi Hoffman, and others, that the presence of the children in your group while you are listening to the Torah makes you mindful, makes you conscious, makes you think, how am I going to teach little Chaim? How am I going to teach little Chani? How is this going to go over with them? And perhaps even more profoundly, when somebody brings their next generation with them, the parent becomes even more mindful of his or her position in the link of the tradition, in the chain of the Masorah, that you realize that you have children. You were a child, are a child of your parents, and now you have children of your own. And just like you received the Masorah, you received the tradition from your parents, you are going to have to pass it on to your children. And if you have very young children, the chances are, although it's not always the case, chances are that you're a young parent. And you may be thinking about these things for the first time. And it happens once in 7 years. It's a very big convention. It would, I'm guessing, make the every 7 and something year convention of the Siyum HaShas look pretty small, relatively speaking. That's a significant event. It's an event that can penetrate the consciousness. The commentaries observe that it's not likely a person is going to learn a whole lot, and that his children are going to learn a whole lot from a once in 7 year reading of the Torah. But the experience of that, which will happen in a person's lifetime 1 or 2 handfuls of times at most, the experience is going to be a profound one that will be part of the self-identity of that person. We're not talking about what the identity of the children is right now, although that's part of it as well. We're talking about how the parents themselves end up being mindful of their role in the chain of the Masorah. Now, whether we have children or whether we know other people who have children or whether we just know other people, when we engage in giving over the Torah, we make of ourselves a chain, a link in the chain of the Masorah. And this mitzvah of Hakel is telling us that that is something to be mindful of. That is something on which, if you will, the Almighty is relying on us to keep the Torah fresh and to keep the Torah alive and to keep the experience of communicating the Torah a profound one that we are mindful of at all times and that we ultimately succeed in conveying to the next generation. Have a good Shabbos.